Hello, I'm James Holland, cellist and board president of Albuquerque Chamber Soloists. Welcome to the pre-concert chat for our first in-person concert in 2 years, coming up this Sunday, January 9th at 3 o'clock at St. Paul Lutheran Church. We have a great program of music that I'm going to tell you a little bit about over the next few minutes, and a wonderful lineup of musicians. Our ACS regulars, violinist David Felberg and Megan Holland, will be joining me, along with two musicians making their first appearances with ACS, the superb pianist Judith Gordon and the new principal violist of the New Mexico Philharmonic, Laura Chang. It's been a delight having them with us, and we've had a terrific week of rehearsals and can't wait to perform for you in person this Sunday. So, of course, our pre-concert chats in the past have been in the fellowship hall of the church, and we would normally have a spread of coffee and pastries, and I would come in and tell you about the music, play you some sound clips, and then we'd get done and all go over together to the church for the concert. However, in this day and age, we feel it's probably a safer idea to do the pre-concert chat for you here virtually online. Also, that reminds me that we want to let you know that, and to remind you, if you've gotten your tickets already or are planning to get a ticket and joining us Sunday, to please bring your proof of vaccination. We are requiring proof of vaccination, and also we also need to wear masks since we are a large indoor gathering. So bring that proof of vaccination, your card or a photo of your card, and your mask, and come on in and get ready for some great music. So, speaking of which, our program opens with Beethoven's first sonata for violin and piano, Opus 12, number 1 in D major, written in 1798 when Beethoven was in his late 20s. So, of course, we know Beethoven as the great romantic composer, the man who revolutionized music in the early years of the 19th century. However, in the early stages of his career, when he wrote this and his other 9 piano sonatas, he had one foot more firmly into the capital C classical tradition of Mozart and Haydn. And so this music, when you listen to it, you hear it's very much in that style, although there are unique touches that make it especially Beethoven. There's an energy and vitality to it that's uniquely his. The piano and the violin were changing in Beethoven's time. More keys were being added to the piano for a wider range of notes and a larger sound, a wider palette of color. The neck of the violin was getting longer, and the strings getting longer, the bridge higher. That creates more tension in the strings, more notes to play, and also a greater projection for the instrument. So Beethoven was fully aware of these developments and was eager to exploit them in these sonatas. So Beethoven's connection to Mozart and Haydn was not just artistic, but personal. There's a really wonderful story about Beethoven meeting Mozart. And Beethoven was all of 17 years old, was living in Bonn, his hometown, already a professional musician. He received time off from his job, and traveled to Vienna with a letter of introduction to Mozart. Went to Mozart's home, presented that letter. Mozart was not in the greatest of moods. His health was not good, and he was also swamped with commissions and compositions, and as he always was, fretting over money. So he impatiently ushered Beethoven into his parlor, sat him at the piano, and said, "Play something for me." And Beethoven started with a Mozart piano concerto in honor of the master. Mozart stopped immediately and said, "No, something of your own." So Beethoven played one of his own compositions, and when he finished, Mozart got up, walked into the next room where his wife was sitting with some friends, and said, "Keep an eye on this boy. He's going to give the world something to talk about." And how right he was. Mozart, in fact, agreed after that meeting to teach Beethoven, take him on as a pupil. Unfortunately, Beethoven's father requested that he return home to Bonn because his mother was seriously ill. So Beethoven did that, and unfortunately was not able to return to Vienna before Mozart died. Beethoven, however, did study with Haydn. He started with him in 1792, it was 5 years after his meeting with Mozart. Although Haydn was extremely busy, he was at the height of his popularity, traveling between Central Europe and London, and also with tons of compositions and commissions that he was working on. However, he understood Beethoven's talent and hoped that Beethoven would in signing his name to a piece of music say Beethoven, pupil of Haydn. He didn't, because he didn't work with Beethoven enough to Beethoven's satisfaction, so his lessons were far too infrequent. But Beethoven held Haydn in the highest regard and dedicated a lot of his early works to him. So, the piece itself. Violin sonatas prior to this classical period were vehicles for the piano. You'd see in a program listed sonata for piano and violin, and the piano getting the lion's share of the work. However, Beethoven, with these changes in the instruments, one of his goals was to make the violin and the piano equal partners. And you'll hear at the very beginning of the sonata how very successful he was with this. The violin and the piano had this very exuberant arpeggio statement together. The violin then gets to take the first very lyrical theme, while the piano accompanies with these gently rolling eighth notes. When the violin finishes, the piano takes the theme in a slightly more decorated way, while the violin takes the accompanimental undulating eighth notes. So in this first minute or so of the piece, you hear right away that the violin and the piano are very much equal partners. So, very equal. The second movement is a genre that Beethoven excelled at, theme and variations. His themes, he wrote in themes and variations through his entire life. And his themes could be anything as exalted as a Mozart aria to something as ridiculous as a cello part turned upside down, and using that as the basis for a theme for a set of variations. So, however, for this sonata, he picked a very genteel and beautifully lyrical theme. So, a set of variations follows, and it wouldn't be Beethoven without a fairly stormy minor variation with radical sudden changes in dynamics, a term that we musicians call subito dynamics. So here's a little taste of that. So, the style and period of Mozart and Haydn, but here's a variation that is uniquely Beethoven. The final movement is a rondo, and a rondo is simply an A theme that keeps coming back between episodes of other sorts of music. So we think of Beethoven as that dour and very serious composer. However, he doesn't get enough credit for his sense of humor. And in this movement, he kind of gives us a little peek into his unique sense of humor. So here's the A theme that you'll hear throughout the movement. So, and it's a very joyous, exuberant movement. So that concludes the Beethoven. Next up, David Felberg and I will be playing a very beautiful duo for violin and cello by the Latvian composer Pēteris Vasks, who was born in 1946. This duo was composed in 2014. It's called Castillo Interior, and it's an homage to St. Teresa of Avila, the Renaissance mystic. So while Vasks wrote in a myriad of styles, this particular piece kind of harkens to his fellow Baltic composer Arvo Pärt, and kind of this holy minimalist, one might say. The piece, again, is for violin and cello, but there are two alternating sections. The first, and these two sections alternate through the duration of the piece. The first is a very meditative, hymn-like chant. And it's a special challenge for just two players, because very often we're playing what we call double stops, two notes simultaneously. And the challenge for us is to balance all three notes and to sound as if we're one instrument. So here's a little taste of the opening of the Vasks. So you can hear what a challenge is going to be to balance the two voices and to create this really homophonic texture. So gorgeous piece. And now that's our first section, and you can kind of hear this D minor tonal center. The second section, our second section is far more turbulent and is loud, driving 16th note rhythms. And here's how this sounds. So quite a contrast. To me, the opening feels like the monastic, contemplative life of the mystic. And this section we just heard is the chaos and bustle of the outside world. So these two sections, these two forces are at work. And then as the piece draws to its close, that D minor of the opening section turns into D major. And these turbulent sections get much quieter and much shorter. And the meditative, mystical, monastic mood, a lot of M words, takes over into the end of the piece. It's a really breathtakingly beautiful piece, and I have a feeling it's going to sound really quite beautiful in the acoustics of the church on Sunday. Final piece on the program is the first piano quintet, Opus 1, in fact, in C minor, by the Hungarian composer Ernst von Dohnányi, or as he was known in his native Hungarian, Erno Dohnányi. Dohnányi, I always like to say, he's the best composer you've never heard of. He was an enormously important figure in Hungarian music in the years between the two world wars. Probably wondering about that sound you're hearing. I happen to be sharing this room with a couple of cats, so if you hear a few stray meows here and there, that's what's going on. They're very sweet cats, by the way. So, Dohnányi. Back to the subject at hand, Dohnányi was a real musical polymath. Besides being a brilliant composer, he was a conductor, concert pianist, and a very able administrator, supervising the conservatory in Budapest, particularly in the interwar years. He's less well known for some reason than his fellow Hungarian composers Bela Bartók and Zoltán Kodály. I think my guess would be because Bartók and Kodály's music is so distinctive. They went out into the field, recorded genuine Hungarian and Romanian folk music, transcribed those tunes, and used that musical language to create a whole new, uniquely Hungarian sort of music. Dohnányi's Hungarian influence was far more subtle and more backwards looking. When you hear this quintet, you'll hear he's very much in the tradition of Dvorak, of Schumann, and Brahms particularly, which brings me to the particular story of this quintet. It was composed when Dohnányi was only 17 years old. And it was such a hit at his school. It was a school piece, and when you hear it, you won't believe that it was. But his composition teacher had the manuscript, and in his summer vacation happened to be in the same town as Brahms. So he showed Brahms the score. Brahms was intrigued and wanted to hear the piece performed. And after he heard it, he sat back and said, I couldn't have written it any better myself. So higher praise one could not find. So, and in fact, I believe Brahms arranged for a lot of performances of this quintet. In fact, there are a number of his chamber works that are really sensational pieces that really deserve a bit more attention. There's another piano quintet written later, and a really wonderful serenade for string trio. So he's one of these composers who I think is a bit unfairly overlooked. But we're going to do something about that on Sunday by presenting you this really astonishing piano quintet. It really, because he was 17 when he wrote it, of course, there's a lot of youthful energy and vigor and passion in it, but there's also this extremely high level of technical mastery. The opening of the quintet is a great illustration of this. The piano begins the tune, the strings take it over, and we build and build and build in drama, and we arrive, and then the cello gets to start a really gorgeous lyrical tune. Throughout this quintet, the string lines are unbelievably satisfying to play. In fact, it's all we can do to not overplay because the parts are so juicy and so right in the wheelhouse of our instruments. Dohnányi really knew how to write for our instruments. So here's the opening of the quintet. Isn't that lovely? Oh my goodness, I can't wait to play that. The second movement is a scherzo, and here Docnani shows a real mastery in the use of rhythm. So the opening, we're in 3/4 time as we often are in a scherzo, but the parts feel a little off skew, like we're trying to find where the emphasis is supposed to be in each measure. Here's a bit of the opening. So, if you wanted to dance, you wouldn't be sure which foot to put down first. He also does this really cool rhythmical trick where, of course, we're in 3/4 time, but we hear two different 3/4 patterns going at once. A quicker one, that's the actual meter, and then one that feels a bit larger. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and see if I can help you hear what this trick is. I almost think of it as sort of a fractal rhythm. Rhythms within rhythms. If I can get to the right spot. One, two, three, 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 one, two, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So, yeah, a lot of fun, and it kind of almost makes you a little dizzy to listen to it, but really clever, very creative. The third movement is a very rapturous, lyrical adagio, quasi andante. In other words, he's saying play it slow, but not too slow, please. And it has the viola gets the spotlight moment at the beginning, getting the first statement of this really gorgeous melody that we all get to play. Hear us all coming in sequence with this tune. And in the middle of this movement, I'm not going to spoil it by playing a sound clip, but there's this transition to just a very heavenly section in D flat major. It comes out of nowhere, really breathtaking. So get your ticket and come hear it at the concert. The last movement, more rhythmical fun. And I mentioned earlier that Docnani wasn't as literally Hungarian as in literally using folk music and idioms as Bartók and Kodály. However, when you hear the opening of this last movement, the rhythmical language is unmistakably Hungarian, I believe. We're in 5/4 time, and so that creates a little out of balance, and he alternates between 5/4 and 6/4 time. And then when the piece goes a little further and we're happily in 6/4 time, even there we go back and forth between a triple and a duple feeling. In the middle of the movement, there's an obligatory fugue, which is, of course, really spectacular. The cello begins it. And then we return to this opening theme again. It's sort of a rondo, much like the last movement of the Beethoven. So here's a little taste of this rhythmical vitality in this last movement. So, a lot of energy. And then that was a transition to a very lyrical tune that begins in the cello. So, of course, we wouldn't have a grand romantic piano quintet without a return to the original material of the first movement at the end of the last movement, where the opening, if you recall, the first sound excerpt was in C minor. Here we have the beginning, we have that material, but this time in C major. And it's going to build and build and build to a very triumphant statement of the opening music of the last movement. And we have this really thunderous and exhilarating conclusion to the piece. But here's a bit of that return of the first movement music. And here it is. My cat loves this part. So before we get too excited, we'll end our listening of the Ducknani here, and that will conclude our concert. So, hope this gives you an idea of some of the music. If you're coming to hear us on Sunday, it'll give you an idea of what to be listening for. And if perhaps you were on the fence about coming, hopefully maybe what you've heard will convince you to come and join us this Sunday afternoon at St. Paul Lutheran Church at 3 o'clock, Albuquerque Chamber Soloists. It's going to be a terrific concert, and we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for listening.